The cold February wind cut through Zara Abbott's thin dress like 1,000 needles, and she pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of the saloon, trying to find any shelter from the biting chill that swept through Vulture City, Arizona Territory, in 1883. She had been standing there for nearly an hour, watching miners and cowboys stumble in and out of the establishment, their rough laughter and the tinny piano music spilling into the dusty street each time the doors swung open. The warmth that briefly escaped made her shiver even harder when it was snatched away by the wind. Her traveling bag sat at her feet, everything she owned in the world contained in that worn leather case. The stagecoach had dropped her here 3 hours ago, and the boarding house she had wired ahead to reserve a room at had burned down 2 weeks prior. Nobody had thought to send her a telegram in response to her reservation request. Now night was falling fast, the temperature dropping with the sun, and Zara had nowhere to go. Her fingers were numb, her lips turning blue, and her teeth chattered so hard her jaw ached. She wrapped her arms around herself, the inadequate shawl doing nothing to protect her from the elements. She had traveled all the way from St. Louis after her aunt passed away, leaving her with nothing but debts, and the name of a friend in Vulture City, who supposedly could help her find work as a schoolteacher. But when she had asked around, nobody seemed to know the woman whose name her aunt had given her. Either the woman had moved on, or her aunt's information had been years out of date. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying would not help her situation. She needed to think to find a solution, but her mind felt as frozen as her fingers. The saloon doors swung open again and a man stumbled out, reeking of whiskey. He noticed her standing there and leered, moving toward her with unsteady steps. "Well, hello there, pretty lady. You looking for some company tonight?" Zara shrank back against the wall, her heart pounding. "No, thank you. Please leave me alone." The man laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Come on now, do not be like that. A woman standing outside a saloon at night, what else am I supposed to think?" Before he could get any closer, a firm hand landed on his shoulder, spinning him around. Zara looked up to see a tall man in a worn coat and dusty hat, his face shadowed in the dim light spilling from the saloon windows. The lady said no. "I suggest you move along, Frank." The voice was deep and steady, carrying an authority that made the drunk man take a step back. "I was just being friendly, Jake. No harm meant. Then be friendly somewhere else." The drunk man muttered something under his breath, but shuffled away down the street, leaving Zara alone with her unexpected defender. The tall man turned to face her, and she could see his features better now. He had a strong jaw covered with a few days' worth of stubble, dark eyes that seemed kind despite the hardness that life on the frontier had carved into his face, and brown hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his hat. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Zara nodded, not trusting her voice. Her shivering had intensified, whether from cold or fear or relief she could not tell. The man frowned, studying her more closely. "You are freezing. How long have you been standing out here?" "I do not know," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "An hour, maybe more." "You have somewhere to stay?" She shook her head, unable to meet his eyes, ashamed of her circumstances. "The boarding house burned down. I just arrived on the stage and I have nowhere to go." The man was quiet for a moment, and Zara could feel him assessing the situation. She knew how it looked, a young woman alone with no prospects, no place to stay. She braced herself for whatever proposition might come next, her stomach churning with dread. "My name is Jake Vaughn," he said finally. "I have a cabin about 2 miles outside of town. It is not much, but it is warm and dry and you would be safe there. I can sleep in the barn. You need to get out of this cold before you freeze to death." Zara looked up at him sharply, searching his face for any sign of deception or ill intent. But his expression was open, concerned, with no trace of the leering calculation she had seen in the drunk man's eyes. "I could not possibly impose like that," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, another violent shiver ran through her body. "It is not an imposition. It is common decency. Look, I understand if you do not trust me. You do not know me from Adam, but I give you my word as a gentleman that you will be safe. Tomorrow in the daylight we can figure out a better solution. But right now you need shelter." Zara wanted to refuse. She had been raised to be proper, to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. But propriety would not keep her from freezing to death in the Arizona night. And something in Jake Vaughn's eyes made her want to trust him. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps it was instinct, but she found herself nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. I am Zara Abbott, and I am very grateful for your kindness." A small smile touched his lips. "Call me Jake. Let me get my horse, and we will get you somewhere warm." He disappeared around the side of the saloon and returned moments later leading a large roan gelding. He secured her traveling bag to the saddle, then turned to her. "Can you ride?" "Yes, a little." "Good. You ride, I will walk. You need to conserve your energy and body heat." Before she could protest, he had lifted her into the saddle with strong, sure hands. The horse shifted beneath her, but Jake kept a firm grip on the reins, steadying the animal. Then he started walking, leading the horse down the main street and out of town. The ride passed in a blur for Zara. She was so cold, so exhausted from the long journey and the stress of the day that she could barely keep herself upright in the saddle. Jake glanced back at her frequently, his expression concerned, but he kept up a steady pace. The moon had risen, casting silver light over the desert landscape, illuminating the saguaro cacti that stood like silent sentinels in the darkness. After what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, a small cabin materialized out of the gloom. It was a simple structure, made of rough-hewn logs with a slanted roof and a stone chimney from which no smoke currently rose. A barn stood nearby, and Zara could hear the soft sounds of animals moving inside. Jake tied the horse to a post and reached up to help Zara down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy now. Let us get you inside." He guided her to the door, pushed it open, and ushered her into the dark interior. She heard him moving around, striking a match, and then warm light bloomed as he lit a lantern. The cabin was small but neat, with a wood stove in one corner, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a bed covered with quilts in another corner, and shelves holding various supplies and a few books. It was sparse but clean, and it looked like heaven to Zara. Jake immediately moved to the stove, opening it and building a fire with practiced efficiency. "Sit down before you fall down," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs near the stove. Zara sank into the chair gratefully, watching as flames began to lick at the kindling, the warmth starting to spread through the small space. Jake filled a kettle with water from a bucket and set it on the stove to heat, then grabbed a quilt from the bed and draped it around her shoulders. "This will take a few minutes to warm up properly," he said. "When the water is hot, I will make you some coffee. That will help." "Thank you," Zara whispered, pulling the quilt tighter around herself. "I do not know how to repay your kindness." Jake waved off her thanks. "No repayment necessary. I could not leave you standing there in the cold." He pulled the other chair over and sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "If you do not mind me asking, what brought you to Vulture City?" As the warmth from the stove slowly began to seep into her bones, Zara found herself telling him everything. About her aunt's death, the debts, the name of a woman who supposedly could help her find work as a teacher. The long journey from St. Louis and her shock at finding the boarding house gone and the woman she sought nowhere to be found. Jake listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "The woman you are looking for, what was her name?" "Clara Whitmore." "Ah." "Clara moved to Phoenix about 6 months ago. Her husband got work there. But as for teaching, there is definitely a need for that here. The town has been trying to organize a proper school for the children. Right now, they just have occasional lessons from whoever is willing and able, mostly the preacher's wife. But she has been unwell lately, and the children's education has suffered." Hope flickered in Zara's chest. "Do you think they would hire me?" "I do not see why not if you are qualified." "Are you?" "I attended normal school in St. Louis. I have my certificate. I taught for a year at a girls' academy before my aunt became ill and I had to care for her." Jake smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Then I would say your prospects are good. Tomorrow, I will take you to speak with Reverend Matthews. He is the one who has been trying to get the school established. If he approves, which I am sure he will, you will have a job." The kettle began to whistle, and Jake rose to make coffee. He handed her a steaming cup, and Zara wrapped her hands around it gratefully, breathing in the rich aroma before taking a careful sip. The hot liquid seemed to spread warmth through her entire body, and she felt herself relaxing for the first time since the stagecoach had arrived. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you do here?" Jake settled back in his chair with his own cup. "I have a small ranch, cattle mostly and a few horses. It is not much, but it is mine. I came out here 5 years ago from Texas looking for a fresh start." There was something in the way he said that last part that suggested a story, perhaps a painful one, but Zara did not pry. She understood the need for fresh starts. They talked for a while longer as Zara thawed out, their conversation easy and comfortable despite having just met. Jake told her about Vulture City, how it had grown up around the mining operations, how it was rough but had good people if you looked past the surface. Zara told him about St. Louis, about her childhood, carefully editing out the less pleasant parts. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with her and she could not suppress a yawn. Jake noticed immediately and stood up. "You need to rest. Take the bed. I will get my bedroll and sleep in the barn like I said." "I cannot take your bed," Zara protested. "You have already done so much." "And I will do this too. It is not up for debate, Miss Abbott. You need a proper rest in a warm place." Zara wanted to argue, but she was too tired and the bed looked too inviting. "At least let me make you breakfast in the morning to thank you," Jake grinned. "I will not say no to that. I am not much of a cook myself." He showed her where she could find a basin to wash up, modestly turning his back while she did so, then bid her good night and headed out to the barn. Zara changed into her nightgown, climbed into the bed and pulled the quilts up to her chin. The bed smelled faintly of wood smoke and something else, something masculine and not unpleasant. She thought she would lie awake worrying about her situation, but the warmth and comfort after the harrowing day proved too much, and she fell asleep almost immediately. Morning sunlight streaming through the small window woke her. For a moment, Zara was disoriented, not recognizing her surroundings, but then the events of the previous night came flooding back. She sat up, noting that someone had added wood to the stove during the night, keeping the cabin warm. Jake must have come in while she slept. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler day dresses, braided her long, dark hair, and set about exploring the kitchen supplies. She found flour, eggs from the chickens she could hear outside, some bacon, and the makings for biscuits. By the time she heard Jake's boots on the porch, she had breakfast well underway. He came in stamping his feet, his cheeks reddened from the cold morning air, and stopped short when he saw her at the stove. "You were serious about breakfast." "I always keep my word, Mr. Vaughn." "Jake," he corrected with a smile. "That smells incredible." They ate together at the small table, and Zara was pleased to see Jake's obvious enjoyment of the meal. It had been a long time since she had cooked for anyone but herself and her ailing aunt, and she found she liked having someone appreciate her efforts. After breakfast, Jake hitched up his horse to a small wagon, helped Zara up to the seat, and they headed into town. The morning light made Vulture City look different than it had the night before, less menacing and more simply rough around the edges. They passed the assay office, the general store, a blacksmith shop, and several other businesses before pulling up in front of a small white church at the end of the main street. Reverend Matthews turned out to be a kindly man in his 50s with a gentle manner and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His wife, Alina, was indeed looking rather pale and tired, and she brightened visibly when Jake explained Zara's qualifications. "Oh, this is an answer to prayer," Alina said, clasping Zara's hands. "The children need proper schooling so desperately, and I simply have not had the strength to keep up with it." Reverend Matthews asked Zara several questions about her education and experience, examined her certificate, and then nodded with satisfaction. "The position is yours if you want it." The town council allocated funds for a teacher's salary. It is not much, but it is steady. The schoolhouse is that building there. He pointed through the window at a modest structure across the street. "It has been sitting empty for months, waiting for someone to bring it to life." "When can I start?" Zara asked, her heart soaring. "Monday, if that suits you. That will give you a few days to settle in and prepare." Reverend Matthews paused, then added, "Of course, you will need somewhere to stay. The boarding house situation is unfortunate." Jake spoke up. "She is welcome to stay at my cabin until other arrangements can be made. I will sleep in the barn to keep everything proper." Reverend Matthews gave Jake a long, measuring look, then glanced at his wife. Some unspoken communication passed between them before he nodded. "That is very generous of you, Jake, though I think we can do better than having you sleep in a barn. The church has a small room in the back where visiting preachers stay. You could use that, and Miss Abbott could have your cabin. That way, there would be no question of impropriety." Zara saw Jake's jaw tighten slightly, and she realized he did not want to leave his home, even temporarily. "That is very kind," she said quickly, "but unnecessary. Mr. Vaughn has been nothing but a gentleman. I am perfectly comfortable with the current arrangement if he is." "I am," Jake said firmly. Alina smiled knowingly. "Well then, that is settled. But Zara, you must come have dinner with us tonight. I am sure you have questions about the students and what materials we have available." They spent the next hour discussing the school, looking through the modest supplies available, and planning the curriculum. Zara's spirits lifted with each passing moment. She had feared her journey west would end in disaster, but instead, she had found exactly what she needed: work and purpose. When they finally left the church and headed back to Jake's wagon, Zara felt lighter than she had in months. "I cannot believe how everything has worked out. Yesterday, I thought I had made a terrible mistake coming here, and today I have a job and a place to stay." Jake helped her up into the wagon, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I am glad. It would have been a shame for Vulture City to lose a good teacher before we even had a chance to benefit from her skills." They rode back to the cabin in comfortable silence, the wagon wheels crunching over the hard, packed earth. When they arrived, Jake showed Zara around the property more thoroughly than he had the night before. He introduced her to his animals: 3 cows, 2 horses, including the roan gelding she had ridden the night before, a dozen chickens, and an ornery goat named Ulysses who seemed determined to eat anything and everything. "The animals are easy enough to care for," Jake explained. "I will still handle most of it, but if you are staying here, you should know where everything is and how things work. The well is over there. Water is good and cold. The privy is behind the barn. I know it is not fancy, but everything works." "It is wonderful," Zara said honestly. After the cramped boarding house where she had lived with her aunt, after the uncertainty and fear of the past 24 hours, the little cabin and its surroundings seemed like paradise. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Jake would rise early, tend to the animals, and then spend his days working on his ranch, mending fences, checking on his cattle that ranged over the scrubland. Zara would prepare meals, clean the cabin despite Jake's protests that it was not necessary, and prepare for her first day of school. In the evenings, they would eat together, talking about everything and nothing. Jake told her stories about his time in Texas, about learning to break horses from his father, about the cattle drive that had first brought him west. Zara told him about books she had read, about her students at the girls' academy, about her dreams of making a difference in young lives. They never spoke about anything too personal, too painful. Jake did not ask why Zara had really left St. Louis beyond her aunt's death, did not pry into the shadows she sensed in her past. Zara did not ask what had driven Jake from Texas, what had put that occasional hardness in his eyes. It was enough to share the present, to enjoy each other's company, to slowly build something that felt like friendship. But Zara was beginning to realize it was more than friendship, at least on her part. She found herself watching Jake when he did not know she was looking, admiring the easy strength with which he moved, the gentleness he showed the animals, the courtesy he always extended to her. She noticed small things, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his laugh, the calluses on his hands from honest work. And sometimes she caught him watching her too, his expression unguarded and warm before he would look away. Her first day of school arrived on a bright Monday morning. Zara dressed with extra care, wanting to make a good impression. She wore her best day dress, a sensible blue cotton with a high collar and long sleeves, and pinned her hair up in a neat bun. Jake drove her into town, the wagon bed loaded with the teaching supplies she had spent the weekend organizing. 12 children showed up that first day, ranging in age from 6 to 14. They were a rough-looking group, many with patched clothes and worn shoes, but their faces were eager and curious as they filed into the schoolhouse. Zara felt a surge of affection for them immediately. She started with introductions, learning each child's name and a little about them. There was Tommy, the blacksmith's son, 8 years old and full of energy. Sarah and Susan, twin girls of 10 who helped their mother run the general store. Marcus, 14, who worked in the mines but desperately wanted to learn to read better. A handful of others, each with their own story, their own reasons for being there. The day passed quickly. Zara worked to assess each child's level, to understand what they knew and what they needed to learn. She read them a story, did some basic arithmetic, and started teaching the younger ones their letters. By the time school let out at 3 o'clock, she was exhausted but exhilarated. Jake was waiting outside with the wagon, and his face lit up when he saw her. "How did it go?" "Wonderfully," Zara said, climbing up beside him. "The children are so eager to learn. It is going to be challenging with so many different ages and levels in one room, but I think we can do great things." "I have no doubt," Jake said warmly. "You have a gift for this. I could tell just from watching you talk about it." The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Zara taught 5 days a week, pouring her heart into her students' education. She watched them progress, saw their confidence grow, and felt a deep satisfaction in the work. The townspeople accepted her quickly, grateful to have a dedicated teacher for their children. Alina Matthews became a good friend, often inviting Zara to tea on Saturday afternoons, and through it all, her bond with Jake deepened. They still maintained the proprieties, Jake sleeping in the barn, Zara in the cabin, but the lines between them were blurring. She knew the way he took his coffee without asking. He anticipated her need for more firewood before she ran low. They moved around each other with an easy familiarity that spoke of something more than polite cohabitation. One evening in late March, Zara was preparing dinner when Jake came in from his work. He looked troubled, his usual easy manner replaced by tension. She set down the spoon she had been using to stir the stew and turned to him. "What is wrong?" Jake hung his hat on the peg by the door and ran a hand through his hair. "I got some news in town today. My brother is coming to visit." Zara waited, sensing there was more. "I have not seen Thomas in 5 years, not since I left Texas. We did not part on the best terms." Jake sank into a chair, his shoulders heavy. "I suppose I should explain." "Only if you want to," Zara said gently, joining him at the table. Jake was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. "My father had a ranch in Texas, a good-sized spread. I was the oldest son, and it was supposed to be mine one day. But I fell in love with a woman, Mary. She was beautiful and charming, and I thought she loved me too. We were engaged to be married." His voice grew bitter. "Then my brother came home from college. Thomas was always the charming one, the educated one. Mary met him and decided he was a better prospect. They married 3 months after she broke our engagement. My father was overjoyed. He always liked Thomas better anyway." Zara reached across the table and took Jake's hand, her heart aching for him. "I am so sorry. I tried to stay to work the ranch like nothing had happened, but I could not stand to see them together, to see her happy with my brother. So I left. Took my share of the money I had saved and came west. I sent a letter letting them know I was alive and well, but I made it clear I did not want contact, and they respected that, until now." "Why is he coming?" "The telegram said our father died 2 months ago. Thomas wants to talk about the ranch, about my inheritance. He is arriving tomorrow on the afternoon stage." Zara squeezed his hand. "That must be difficult." "I do not want his money," Jake said firmly. "I built this place with my own 2 hands. It is mine in a way that ranch never was. But I suppose I owe him the courtesy of a conversation." The next afternoon, Jake went to town alone to meet his brother. Zara stayed at the cabin, ostensibly to work on lesson plans, but she found herself too distracted to concentrate. She kept imagining the meeting, wondering how it would go, worrying about Jake. When she heard the wagon returning, she went to the window. 2 men climbed down, and even from a distance, she could see the family resemblance. Thomas Vaughn was slightly shorter than Jake, with lighter hair and a more polished appearance. His clothes were expensive, his manner that of a successful man. Zara opened the door as they approached, and Jake made the introductions. "Thomas, this is Miss Zara Abbott. She is the new schoolteacher in town. Zara, my brother Thomas." Thomas removed his hat and gave her a charming smile. "Miss Abbott, it is a pleasure." Jake did not mention he had such lovely company. "Miss Abbott is staying here temporarily while other arrangements are made," Jake said stiffly. "I sleep in the barn to maintain propriety." Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, but he simply nodded. "Of course. I do not mean to intrude. Perhaps I should stay at the hotel in town." "There is no hotel," Jake said. "The boarding house burned down and the saloon rooms are not fit for anyone. You can stay in the barn with me." The evening was awkward. Zara prepared dinner for three, and the brothers sat at the small table making stilted conversation. Thomas talked about the ranch, about their father's death, about the will. Their father had left the ranch to both brothers equally, with the stipulation that they work it together or sell it and split the proceeds. "I do not want to sell," Thomas said. "The ranch has been in our family for 3 generations, but I cannot run it alone. I need you to come back, Jake." Jake shook his head. "My life is here now. Sell my half to someone else. It does not work like that. The will is specific. It has to be you or we sell." "Then sell." Thomas set down his fork with a sigh. "I know you hate me. I do not blame you. What I did, what Mary and I did, it was wrong. I have lived with that guilt every day for 5 years." "How is Mary?" Jake asked, his voice carefully neutral. "She left me 2 years ago, ran off with a salesman from Houston. The marriage was a mistake from the start. She did not love me any more than she loved you. She just wanted security and status, and she thought I could provide more of that than you could." Jake absorbed this information without visible reaction. "I am sorry it did not work out." "Are you?" Thomas asked quietly. "I would not blame you if you were not." "I am sorry because I wasted 5 years of my life mourning something that was not real," Jake said. "If Mary had truly loved me, she would not have been so easily swayed. You did me a favor, though it took me a long time to see it." Zara felt like she was intruding on a private moment and stood to clear the plates. Thomas watched her for a moment, then looked back at his brother. "You care for her. I can see it in the way you look at her." Jake's eyes cut to Zara, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We are friends." "Jake, do not make the same mistake I did. If you care for her, do not let pride or fear or anything else keep you from telling her. Life is too short for that kind of regret." The rest of Thomas's visit was less tense. He spent 2 more days, and in that time, the brothers found a tentative peace. They would never be close again. Too much had happened for that, but they reached an understanding. Jake agreed to sign paperwork allowing Thomas to buy out his share of the ranch, giving him full ownership. In return, Thomas provided Jake with a generous sum that would allow him to expand his own ranch significantly. The morning Thomas left on the stage back to Texas, he shook Jake's hand and said, "I truly am sorry for what happened. I hope you can be happy here, happier than you ever would have been in Texas." After Thomas was gone, Jake was quiet for the rest of the day. Zara gave him space, sensing he needed time to process everything that had happened. But that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, he finally spoke. "He was right, you know, about me caring for you." Zara's heart began to race. "Jake, I know this is not the proper way to do this. I should court you properly, take you to church socials, ask permission from someone, though I suppose you have no family for me to ask. But I have never been good at pretending, and I do not want to start now. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. I wake up every morning looking forward to seeing you, talking with you, sharing meals with you. When I am out working, half my thoughts are about things I want to tell you later, things that will make you smile." He turned to face her, his dark eyes intense. "I am in love with you, Zara Abbott. I think I started falling for you that first night when you were shivering outside the saloon and trying so hard to be brave." Tears filled Zara's eyes. "I love you too. I have been afraid to admit it, even to myself. Everything happened so fast, and I did not want to be foolish, did not want to mistake gratitude for something deeper. But it is not gratitude. When I see you, my whole day gets brighter. When you smile at me, I feel like I can do anything. You make me feel safe and valued and seen in a way no one else ever has." Jake reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, marry you properly. I know people will talk, given how we met and you living here, but I do not care about that. I care about you." "I do not care what people say either," Zara said, "but I would like to be courted to be married. I want everything with you, Jake Vaughn." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Then that is what we will do." The next few months were both wonderful and challenging. Jake moved into the room behind the church, and Zara stayed at the cabin, giving them both the propriety they needed while Jake courted her. He came to the cabin every evening after his work was done, and they would sit on the porch talking until the stars came out. On Sundays after church, they would take long walks together, always properly chaperoned by whoever could be convinced to come along, usually Eleanor Matthews. Jake was courting her in every traditional sense. He brought her wildflowers picked from the desert, their vibrant colors a testament to life thriving in harsh conditions. He fixed things around the cabin that did not really need fixing, just for an excuse to be helpful. He came to the school one afternoon and built a proper bookshelf for her growing collection of primers and readers. The town watched their courtship with approval. Jake was well-liked and respected, and Zara had quickly become a valued member of the community. The children adored her. Their parents appreciated her dedication, and her friendship with Eleanor Matthews had spread to other women in town. When Jake asked Reverend Matthews for permission to marry Zara in July, 4 months after they had met, the Reverend gave his blessing enthusiastically. The wedding was held in the small white church on a hot Saturday morning in July 1883. Nearly the entire town turned out for the ceremony. Zara wore a simple white dress that Eleanor had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair. Jake wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven for the first time since Zara had known him. She almost did not recognize him without the stubble, but his eyes were the same, warm and full of love as he watched her walk down the aisle. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony, his voice rich with emotion as he spoke about love and commitment and building a life together. When Jake slipped the simple gold band onto Zara's finger, his hand was steady, his voice firm as he made his vows. When it was Zara's turn, she looked into his eyes and promised to love him, honor him, and stand by him for all the days of her life. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews said with a broad smile. "Jake, you may kiss your bride." Jake cupped Zara's face in his hands and kissed her gently, sweetly, a promise of all the kisses to come. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Zara felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The reception was held in the churchyard, with tables of food brought by various townspeople, and a fiddler playing lively tunes. Children ran around playing games while adults talked and laughed. Jake and Zara moved through the crowd accepting congratulations, but Zara was acutely aware of Jake's hand at the small of her back, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon Jake had decorated with ribbons and wildflowers. He drove them back to the cabin, their cabin now, officially and completely. When they arrived, Jake jumped down and came around to lift Zara from the wagon. But instead of setting her on her feet, he carried her to the door and over the threshold, making her laugh with delight. Inside, the cabin looked different. Jake had spent the past few days making changes, expanding the sleeping area with a larger bed he had built himself, adding pretty curtains to the windows, installing more shelves, making the space ready for a wife. There were wildflowers in a jar on the table, and the lantern was already lit, casting a warm glow over everything. Jake set Zara down gently, his hands lingering on her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vaughn." "I like the sound of that," Zara said, sliding her arms around his neck. "Mrs. Vaughn." "So do I," Jake murmured, and then he was kissing her again, but different from the chaste kiss at the church. This was deeper, more urgent, full of months of restrained desire. Zara responded eagerly, her fingers threading through his hair as she pressed closer to him. They made love that night with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, discovering what gave pleasure, communicating in whispered words and gentle touches. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the bed Jake had built, Zara felt a peace and contentment she had never known before. This was where she belonged, in this man's arms, in this small cabin in the Arizona territory, building a life together. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and simple joys. Zara continued teaching, loving her students and taking pride in their progress. Jake expanded his ranch with the money from the sale of his share of the Texas property, buying more cattle and another horse. Together, they worked to improve the cabin, adding a proper kitchen area, building a porch that wrapped around two sides, planting a small garden. They learned each other's rhythms, how to work together, how to support each other through challenges. When a difficult winter brought heavy rains that threatened their livestock, they worked side by side to save the animals, coming home exhausted and muddy but triumphant. When one of Zara's students, Marcus the Minor, died in a cave-in at 14, Jake held her while she cried, understanding her grief without needing her to explain it. In the quiet moments, they would sit on the porch watching the stars, talking about their dreams. Jake wanted to build the ranch into something substantial, something they could pass down to their children one day. Zara wanted to expand the school, maybe even start a small lending library for the town. They made plans together, built dreams together, and their love deepened with each passing day. Zara discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1884, a little over a year after their wedding. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be sure before telling Jake. When she finally did, over breakfast one morning, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, wonder, and then he was around the table, pulling her into his arms, kissing her face, her hair, her lips, murmuring how happy he was, how much he loved her. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "Yes, we are," Zara confirmed, laughing through tears of joy. "In about 6 months, if my calculations are correct." Jake immediately became overprotective, insisting she rest more, not lift anything heavy, take better care of herself. Zara found it both endearing and slightly exasperating, but she understood it came from love and excitement. As her pregnancy progressed and her belly grew round, Jake would spend evenings talking to the baby, his hand on her stomach, feeling the kicks and movements, his face filled with wonder. They prepared the cabin for the baby's arrival, building a cradle, setting aside a corner for the nursery area, gathering supplies. Alina Matthews and the other women in town threw Zara a small celebration, bringing gifts they had made, baby clothes and blankets and advice. Zara felt embraced by this community in a way she never had in St. Louis, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her and her growing family. Her labor began on a cool November evening. Jake had ridden to town to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Hawkins, an experienced woman who had delivered most of the babies in Vulture City over the past 20 years. While Jake was gone, Zara tried to stay calm, timing the contractions, preparing the space as she had been instructed. When Jake returned with Mrs. Hawkins and Alina Matthews, who had insisted on coming to help, Zara was relieved. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. Jake stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, encouraging her when she was exhausted and ready to give up. "You can do this," he whispered during one particularly hard contraction. "You are the strongest person I know. Just a little longer, love. Just a little longer." Finally, as the sun was beginning to set on the second day, their son was born, red-faced and wailing lustily. Mrs. Hawkins cleaned him up and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Zara's arms. Zara looked down at the tiny face, at the dark hair and the eyes that would probably turn the same brown as his father's, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "He is perfect," Jake breathed, sitting on the edge of the bed, his arm around Zara as they gazed at their son together. "What should we name him?" Zara asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their baby, Jake said, "What about Samuel? It was my grandfather's name. He was a good man." "Samuel Vaughn," Zara said, trying it out. "I like it. Samuel Jake Vaughn." Jake's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "Samuel Jake Vaughn," he repeated, then leaned down to kiss Zara's forehead. "Thank you for him, for everything. You have given me a life I never thought I would have, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. I love you so much." "I love you too," Zara whispered. "You saved me that night outside the saloon, but you have kept saving me every day since. You are the best man I know, Jake Vaughn, and I am so grateful you are mine." The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew from a baby into a curious toddler, then a bright young boy who followed his father around the ranch like a shadow, learning about animals and hard work. Zara returned to teaching when Samuel was 6 months old, bringing him to school with her until he was old enough to stay with Jake during the day. 3 years after Samuel was born, they had a daughter, Emma, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's easy smile. 2 years after that came another son, David, who was quieter than his siblings but just as loved. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Jake adding on rooms, making it into a proper house. The ranch prospered. Jake's hard work and smart management paid off, and they were able to hire help as the operation grew. Zara continued teaching, becoming a fixture in Vulture City, watching not just her own children grow but several generations of students pass through her classroom. Their love never dimmed. Even after years of marriage, Jake would still bring Zara wildflowers picked from the desert. She would still watch him from the window as he worked, admiring him, loving him, grateful every day for the choice he made to help a shivering woman outside a saloon. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, talking about their day, making plans, dreaming together. When Samuel was 15, Emma 12, and David 10, Zara discovered she was pregnant again. It was a surprise, as she was now 35 and had thought her childbearing years were behind her. But Jake was delighted, and the children were excited about having another sibling. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and Zara had to give up teaching for the duration. A young woman from Phoenix, trained at a normal school there, took over the classroom temporarily. Zara chafed at the inactivity but knew it was necessary to keep the baby safe. In the spring of 1897, their second daughter was born, a tiny thing they named Rose. She was perfect and healthy despite Zara's difficult pregnancy, and the whole family doted on her. Samuel was old enough to be genuinely helpful with the baby. Emma loved having a little sister to care for, and David was surprisingly gentle with the infant. Jake was 42 now, with silver threading through his brown hair, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Zara, he was as handsome as the day she met him, and she loved him more with each passing year. She was 36, with her own silver hairs and the wear of raising 4 children showing on her body. But Jake looked at her like she was still the beautiful young woman he had found shivering outside a saloon 15 years ago. The children grew. Samuel took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for the work. Emma discovered she loved teaching and began helping her mother in the classroom, preparing to take over one day. David found his calling with the horses, training them with a patience and skill that surpassed even his father's. And Rose grew from a baby into a delightful child who seemed to have inherited the best qualities of both her parents. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jake surprised Zara with a trip to Phoenix. It was the first time they had left Vulture City together since their wedding, the first time they had stayed in a hotel, eaten in a restaurant, walked city streets. They spent 3 days exploring, shopping, seeing the sights, and it was wonderful. But Zara found she was eager to get back home, back to their children, their ranch, their life. "I do not need fancy trips or expensive gifts," she told Jake as they rode the stage back to Vulture City. "Everything I want, everything I need is right there at home." Jake smiled and squeezed her hand. "I feel the same, but it is good to remember how far we have come, how much we have built together." "Do you ever regret leaving Texas?" Zara asked, "giving up your share of your family's ranch?" "Not once," Jake said firmly. "If I had stayed, I never would have been in Vulture City that night. I never would have met you, and our life together is worth more than any inheritance. You were right that first morning when you said everything worked out. You thought you made a mistake coming here, but it was the best decision you ever made, just like my decision to leave Texas was mine." "I think my best decision was trusting you that night," Zara said. "Getting on that horse, going to your cabin, I could have refused. I could have tried to find somewhere else to stay, but something told me you were a good man and I should trust you." "I am glad you did," Jake said, "because that was the night my life truly began." The years continued to pass, bringing changes but also constants. The children grew and started families of their own. Samuel married a woman from Phoenix and brought her back to Vulture City, where they built a house on the ranch property and started adding grandchildren to the family. Emma became the head teacher at the school, married the new deputy sheriff, and had children who attended the same classroom where their mother and grandmother had taught. David moved to California for a while, working on a horse ranch there, but eventually came back to Arizona with a wife and settled on a piece of property near the original ranch. Even Rose, the baby, grew up, attended normal school, and became a teacher in Prescott before returning home to marry a childhood friend. Through it all, Jake and Zara remained at the center of their growing family, the foundation on which everything else was built. They watched their children succeed, supported them through failures, delighted in their grandchildren, and remained steadfastly devoted to each other. As they grew older, they spent more time on the porch, reminiscing about the early days. Jake would still bring Zara wildflowers, though now he picked them with stiffer fingers, his joints aching with age. Zara still cooked his favorite meals, though now Emma or one of the daughters-in-law usually helped, insisting that Zara rest more. On a warm evening in 1918, 35 years after they had met, Jake and Zara sat on that porch together, watching the sunset. They were both in their 60s now, their hair completely silver, their faces lined with age. But their hands were still clasped together, their love still strong. "Do you remember the first time we sat here together?" Jake asked. "That night after I brought you home from the saloon." "Of course," Zara said. "I was so cold and scared, and you were so kind. I think I started falling in love with you that night, though I did not admit it to myself for months." "I was lost the moment I saw you," Jake said. "Shivering outside that saloon, trying so hard to be brave, refusing to give up even when things looked hopeless. I thought, this is a woman worth knowing, and I was right. You have been the best part of my life, Zara Vaughn. Every single day with you has been a gift. "You saved me," Zara said softly. "Not just that night, but every day since. You gave me a home, a family, a life I never dreamed was possible. I love you, Jake Vaughn. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in those same shades of orange and pink they had watched so many times before. Around them, the ranch buzzed with life, grandchildren playing, children and their spouses coming and going, animals making their evening sounds. It was a far cry from that cold February night in 1883, when a desperate woman had stood shivering outside a saloon, and a cowboy had offered his cabin and his heart. As darkness fell and the stars came out, Jake and Zara remained on the porch, surrounded by the life they had built together, secure in a love that had withstood the test of time and would continue on in the children and grandchildren they had raised, in the community they had served, in the memories that would be passed down through generations. Their love story had started with a simple act of kindness on a cold night, and it had grown into something beautiful, something lasting, something that proved that even in the harsh landscape of the Old West, love could bloom and flourish and create something extraordinary. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, with David handling the horse training operation that had become renowned throughout Arizona. Emma's school had expanded, now serving over 50 students with 3 teachers working under her direction. Rose had returned to help at the school as well, bringing fresh ideas and energy. The Vaughn name was respected throughout the territory, synonymous with hard work, integrity, and community service. Jake and Zara celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1923 with a massive party attended by what seemed like half of Arizona. Their children and grandchildren had organized the celebration, holding it at the ranch with tables groaning under the weight of food, musicians playing, and people coming from miles around to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. Samuel stood to give a speech, his own children gathered around him. 40 years ago, my father saw a woman in need and offered help without expecting anything in return. That simple act of kindness changed not just 2 lives but countless others. Mom and Dad built more than a ranch here. They built a family, a community, a legacy of compassion and hard work that all of us try to live up to every day. They showed us what real love looks like, the kind that endures through hardship, that grows stronger with time, that puts the other person first without keeping score. We are all blessed to be part of their story. The crowd erupted in applause, and Jake stood, helping Zara to her feet beside him. He looked around at the assembled faces, his family and friends, people whose lives had been touched by his and Zara's in ways both large and small. Then he looked at his wife, and his voice was thick with emotion as he spoke. "I have lived a good life, but the best part started the day I met this woman. She was shivering outside a saloon with nowhere to go, and I offered her my cabin. What I did not know was that she would offer me something far more valuable in return: her heart, her trust, her partnership in building a life together. Everything good in my life flows from that moment. So I want to thank her for saying yes to a lonely cowboy, for taking a chance on a future that must have seemed uncertain, for standing by me through every challenge and celebrating every joy. Zara, you are my everything." Zara was crying openly now, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "You gave me a home when I had none, but more than that, you gave me hope. You showed me that I was worthy of love, of happiness, of a future bright with possibility. Every day with you has been an adventure, and I would not change a single moment. You are my heart, Jake Vaughn, now and always." They kissed then, to the cheers and applause of the crowd, and it was as sweet and genuine as their first kiss at their wedding 40 years earlier. Love had not made them perfect, had not shielded them from life's difficulties, but it had given them the strength to face everything together and the joy to celebrate every victory, no matter how small. As the party continued late into the night, Jake and Zara eventually slipped away to their porch, their sanctuary, their place of peace. They sat in their rocking chairs, holding hands, listening to the sounds of celebration drifting from the yard. "How many grandchildren do we have now?" Zara asked. "I have lost count," Jake chuckled. 12, with 2 more on the way if I heard correctly. And Samuel mentioned that his oldest is getting serious with that girl from Prescott, so there might be great-grandchildren in our future. Great-grandchildren, Zara repeated wonderingly. When I was standing outside that saloon, freezing and alone, I never imagined I would live to see great-grandchildren. I never imagined any of this. Neither did I, Jake admitted. I thought my life would be running cattle, growing old alone, maybe hiring some help as I got too old to do it all myself. Instead, I got a wife, children, a family that keeps growing. I got a reason to build something lasting, something that will continue long after we are gone. It has been a good life, Zara said contentedly. The best, Jake agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence only possible between 2 people who know each other so well that words are not always necessary. Finally, Zara spoke again. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not been there that night? If you had stayed home or left the saloon earlier or gone out a different door?" "Sometimes," Jake said. "But then I remind myself that wondering about what might have been is pointless. What matters is what did happen. I was there. You were there. And we found each other in a moment when we both needed exactly what the other could provide. You needed shelter and safety. I needed purpose and love. We gave each other exactly what we needed, and we built a life from that foundation." "Do you believe in fate?" Zara asked. "That we were meant to find each other?" Jake considered the question. "I do not know about fate, but I know that every decision I made, every path I took, led me to that saloon that night. Leaving Texas, coming to Arizona, stopping for a drink that evening instead of riding straight home. And every decision you made led you there too. Leaving St. Louis, getting on that stage, standing outside instead of trying to push your way inside where it was warm. Maybe that is fate, or maybe it is just the beautiful randomness of life. Either way, I am grateful for it." The music from the party had stopped, and people were starting to leave, calling out their goodbyes and thanks. Their children came to check on them, making sure they were all right, expressing their love before heading to their own homes. Soon, the ranch was quiet again, just Jake and Zara and the night sounds of the desert. "Ready for bed?" Jake asked, standing and offering his hand to Zara. She took it, allowing him to help her up. Her joints protested, stiff from sitting, but his strong grip steadied her. They walked into the house they had built together, through rooms filled with memories, photographs covering the walls documenting 40 years of life and love. As they prepared for bed, moving around each other with the ease of long practice, Zara thought about how blessed she was. She had found not just a home that cold February night in 1883, but a true partner. A man who valued her mind as much as her heart, who supported her dreams, who stood beside her through everything life threw at them. They climbed into bed and Jake pulled her close, her back against his chest, his arm wrapped around her waist, the position they had slept in for 40 years. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Thank you for stopping that night. Thank you for caring about a stranger who had nowhere to go." "Thank you for trusting me," Jake replied. "Thank you for building this life with me." The years continued to pass gently after that. Jake and Zara gradually slowed down, spending more time resting, letting their children handle the day-to-day operations of the ranch and school. They enjoyed their grandchildren, and eventually their great-grandchildren, taking pleasure in watching the family tree spread and grow. They still sat on the porch every evening, weather permitting, watching the sunset and talking about the day. They still held hands, still shared gentle kisses, still looked at each other with love in their eyes. Age had weakened their bodies but not their devotion to each other. In the spring of 1928, Jake fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then weakness, then difficulty breathing. The doctor from Phoenix came to examine him and delivered the news that his heart was failing. There was nothing to be done except make him comfortable and wait. Jake took the news with characteristic calm. He was 73 years old and had lived a full, rich life. He was ready for what came next, with only one regret, that he would have to leave Zara behind. Zara refused to accept it at first, insisting that Jake would recover, that he just needed rest and proper care. But as the weeks passed and he continued to weaken, she had to face reality. The man she had loved for 45 years was dying. The family gathered, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling the house, wanting to say goodbye, to tell Jake how much he meant to them, to thank him for the life he had built and the example he had set. Jake received them all with grace and love, dispensing wisdom and encouragement, making sure each person knew how much they were loved. But it was Zara he wanted beside him most. She rarely left his bedside, holding his hand, talking to him, reminiscing about their life together. She told him again about that night outside the saloon, how scared she had been, how his kindness had changed everything. "You saved me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me, and I got 45 years of happiness because of it. 45 years of love and laughter and purpose. You gave me everything, Jake Vaughn." Jake squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. "You saved me too," he rasped. "I was just existing before you came along. You taught me how to live, how to love, how to be part of something bigger than myself. Do not mourn too long, my love. Celebrate what we had. It was beautiful." "It was," Zara agreed, her voice breaking. "It is. I will love you forever." "And I will love you beyond forever," Jake whispered. He died that night peacefully with Zara holding his hand and their children gathered around. His last words were, "I love you," spoken so softly that only Zara heard them. She pressed a kiss to his forehead and told him she loved him too, then held him as he took his final breath and slipped away. The grief was overwhelming. Zara had known this day would come eventually, but knowing did not make it easier. The man who had been her partner, her best friend, her love for 45 years was gone, and the hole he left in her life felt impossible to fill. But she was not alone in her grief. Her children surrounded her with love and support. The community that she and Jake had served for decades rallied around her, bringing food, offering condolences, sharing their own memories of Jake and how he had touched their lives. The funeral was one of the largest Vulture City had ever seen. People came from all over Arizona to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, his hard work, and his devotion to family and community. Zara sat in the front pew of the church where she and Jake had married, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and listened as person after person stood to speak about Jake's impact on their lives. Samuel spoke about his father's work ethic and the values he instilled. Emma talked about his gentleness and the way he always had time for his children, no matter how busy he was. David shared stories about learning to train horses from his father, about the patience and skill Jake had possessed. Rose spoke about being the baby of the family, and how her father had doted on her without spoiling her, always making her feel special. When it was Zara's turn to speak, she stood on shaky legs and faced the assembled crowd. "Jake Vaughn was the best man I have ever known," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "He was kind and strong and true. He offered me shelter when I had none, and in doing so, he gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. We built something beautiful together, a family, a home, a legacy of love. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I will also be grateful every day that I got to love him and be loved by him. He taught me what it means to truly share your life with another person, to build something lasting, to love without reservation. I am a better person because of him, and I know many of you feel the same way. He touched so many lives with his quiet strength and his generous heart. Though he is gone from this world, he will never be forgotten." Jake was buried in the small cemetery on the edge of town, under a cottonwood tree with a view of the desert landscape he had loved. Zara stood at the graveside with her family around her, saying a final goodbye to the man who had been her everything. In the months that followed, Zara slowly learned to live without Jake physically beside her. It was hard, harder than anything she had ever done. But she found comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the routines they had established over the years, in the memories that filled every corner of the house and ranch. She still sat on the porch every evening, though now she sat alone in one rocking chair, the other empty beside her. But she would talk to Jake anyway, telling him about her day, about the grandchildren's activities, about how the ranch was doing. Sometimes she felt foolish, talking to empty air, but mostly it brought her comfort, a way to maintain the connection they had shared. Zara lived for 3 more years after Jake's death. She remained active and engaged, still visiting the school occasionally to read to the children, still hosting family dinners on Sundays, still maintaining the garden she and Jake had planted together. But everyone could see that part of her was missing, that she was waiting for her time to join him. In the summer of 1931, Zara passed away peacefully in her sleep, in the bed she had shared with Jake for nearly half a century. She was 71 years old. Her children found her in the morning, a peaceful expression on her face, as if she had simply drifted off to wherever Jake was waiting for her. The funeral was smaller than Jake's, but no less meaningful. Zara was laid to rest beside her husband under the cottonwood tree, their graves side by side, their names carved into matching headstones. The inscription reads simply, Jake Vaughn, 1855–1928, and Zara Vaughn, 1860–1931, together forever. The legacy they left behind continued to grow. The ranch prospered under Samuel's management and was eventually passed to his children. The school that Zara had taught in for so many years was renamed the Zara Vaughn School in her honor, continuing to educate children for generations to come. Emma carried on her mother's teaching methods and philosophy, instilling the same love of learning in her students. The story of how Jake and Zara met became a family legend, passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren grew up hearing about the cowboy, who saw a woman shivering outside a saloon and offered his cabin and his heart, about the woman who trusted a stranger and found her true home, about the love that grew from that simple act of kindness and lasted a lifetime. The family remained close, gathering every year on the anniversary of Jake and Zara's wedding to celebrate the love that had started it all. They would visit the graves, bringing wildflowers like the ones Jake had picked for Zara all those years, and they would tell the story again, making sure the younger generations understood where they came from and the values that had built the family they were part of. The cabin where Jake had first brought Zara was preserved and maintained, becoming a treasured family landmark. Grandchildren played in the rooms where their grandparents had lived and loved, and newly married couples sometimes stayed there for their honeymoons, hoping to start their own marriages with the same foundation of love and commitment that Jake and Zara had built. Vulture City itself changed over the years. The mining eventually played out and the town shrank, but it never disappeared entirely. The families that Jake and Zara had been part of kept it alive, maintaining the church, the school, the cemetery where so many of their loved ones rested. The Vaughn Ranch remained one of the largest operations in the area, a testament to the hard work and vision of the man who had started it and the woman who had helped him build it into something lasting. The love story of Jake and Zara Vaughn became more than just a family legend. It became part of the local folklore, a reminder that even in harsh times and hard places, love can flourish. That a simple act of kindness can change not just two lives but ripple outward to affect countless others. That building a life together, based on mutual respect and genuine affection, can create something that outlasts the individuals and becomes a legacy for future generations. On cold February nights, when the wind swept through Vulture City, old-timers would sometimes tell the story to newcomers. They would point to the ranch in the distance, to the school building, to the graves under the cottonwood tree, and they would talk about the woman who had nowhere to go and the cowboy who offered his cabin and his heart. They would talk about love that lasted through 45 years of marriage and continued even beyond death. They would talk about a legacy built on kindness, hard work, and unwavering devotion. And sometimes, on those cold February nights, if you walked past the old cabin on the Vaughn Ranch, people swore you could see two figures on the porch, sitting in rocking chairs, holding hands, watching the sunset together just like they had done for so many years. Whether it was imagination or something more, it was a fitting image, a reminder that true love never really ends. It just changes form and continues on, inspiring each new generation to seek the same kind of deep, abiding connection that Jake and Zara had found in each other all those years ago when fate or chance or providence brought them together on a cold night outside a saloon in the Arizona Territory.